Welcome to the channel. Today we've got something incredible for you. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The soft glow of a lantern flickered in the distance, casting a pale light across the misty garden. Lady Victoria stood motionless, her eyes fixed on its shimmering glow. There was a calmness to her, a peace that seemed too perfect, too final. But as the lantern's light grew brighter, a low whisper echoed through the trees, one that no one else could hear. And in that moment, Victoria's smile faltered. Was it peace she had found, or something far darker, waiting in the shadows of the light? Chapter 1. The Vanishing Light. The evening fog settled over London like a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was one of those nights when the city seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something that never quite came. The lamplights on Baker Street flickered in the damp chill, casting long shadows against the wet cobblestones. The glow of the gas lamps was weak, fighting to push back the fog that crept ever closer, swallowing the world outside. Inside 221B Baker Street, the warmth of the fire crackled gently, filling the room with the comforting scent of oak. Sherlock Holmes sat in his usual chair by the window, a contemplative figure with his sharp profile framed by the soft orange glow of the hearth. His gaze was fixed on something far beyond the walls of his study, lost in thought. His ever-observant eyes seemed to be seeing things that no one else could. As always, his mind was working, analysing, piecing together a puzzle only he could see. Dr. John Watson entered the room quietly, a tray in hand. The doctor had grown used to Holmes's moments of intense concentration and would not disturb him unless absolutely necessary. He set the tray down on the table beside his friend, the steam rising from a freshly brewed cup of tea, but Holmes didn't acknowledge it. Watson stood silently, watching the back of his friend, waiting. "Holmes," Watson finally spoke, his voice breaking the silence in the room. "Is something troubling you? You've been in such a state of deep thought tonight." Holmes's eyes never left the window. He took a long breath and exhaled slowly, as if gathering the fragments of his thoughts. Then, in a voice tinged with something resembling excitement, he spoke. "Yes, Watson. Something does trouble me. A strange pattern of disappearances, tied to an object I can barely fathom." "A lantern." Watson raised an eyebrow in surprise. "A lantern," he echoed. "What do you mean?" Holmes turned his piercing gaze to Watson, his face calm but intense. "A lantern, Watson, but not just any lantern. It's an oddity, one that disappears at dusk, vanishing as the last rays of daylight fade. Each night it appears at a different location. Those who come near it vanish without a trace. Not a single clue, not a sound. Only a faint, lingering fragrance of lavender in the air." Watson felt a shiver crawl up his spine. The idea of a vanishing lantern was peculiar enough, but the added element of people disappearing was, in itself, deeply unsettling. And what is it about this lantern that connects these disappearances? Holmes leaned forward, his fingers steepled, his expression pensive. "The lantern, Watson, is not just a source of light. It is a symbol. Those who approach it seem to be drawn in by its glow, as though it calls to them, guides them towards something beyond the ordinary. But once they are near, the light is extinguished, and they are gone. Only the lavender scent remains, an unmistakable trace, as though the very air has been touched by something otherworldly." Watson's mind raced, trying to make sense of the strange events Holmes was describing. "Do you think this is some kind of trap? A clever ruse?" Holmes shook his head slowly, a slight smile playing at the corner of his lips. "No, Watson. This is something much more intricate There is a deeper mystery here, one that we cannot yet understand. It has a rhythm, a method that we must uncover. This lantern, this vanishing light, is not merely a trick of the eye. It is a key, and we must discover what it unlocks. As Holmes spoke, Watson felt an unsettling sense of calm wash over him. It was the calm before the storm, the kind of calm that only Sherlock Holmes could invoke when solving a mystery. There was something oddly soothing about Holmes's unwavering confidence, even in the face of a mystery so strange and incomprehensible. But there was no denying that the mystery itself was deeply unsettling. "So, what is our next step?" Watson asked, the urgency of the situation slowly starting to creep into his voice. Holmes rose from his chair and walked toward the small desk, cluttered with papers and his familiar assortment of instruments. He grabbed his coat from the back of a nearby chair and slid it on, the familiar motion signaling his readiness. "We will find this lantern, Watson. We will follow it, and we will uncover its secret. But this is no ordinary case. Whatever force is behind this lantern, it is not something we've encountered before, and it will require all of our wits to unravel." Watson nodded, sensing the gravity of the situation. There was a silence between them, a shared understanding of the strange and dangerous path ahead. Holmes moved toward the door, his gaze flicking back toward Watson, his eyes sharp with purpose. "Stay close, Watson," Holmes said softly, almost as a whisper. "Tonight, we follow the light, and perhaps we will finally discover what lies within its glow." With that, the two of them stepped into the foggy night, the mystery unfolding around them like a shadow that refused to dissipate. Holmes's steps were swift, deliberate, and with each movement, the tension in the air seemed to grow thicker. Something in the air told Watson that this would not be a simple case. They were about to be led down a path that no one had walked before. The night was waiting. Chapter 2. The Lady in Lavender. The next evening the fog had thickened, and the cool night air carried with it the faint, almost intoxicating scent of lavender. Holmes and Watson found themselves standing at the edge of the city, just outside the grand gates of an ancient manor. Its towering stone walls loomed against the backdrop of a darkened sky, an imposing figure in the night, like a silent witness to centuries of secrets. The estate, surrounded by an overgrown garden, was quiet, eerily so. Not a single sound stirred, save for the occasional rustle of leaves caught by the wind. Even the gas lamps that dotted the road seemed to flicker and dim under the heavy, wet blanket of fog, their light weak and hesitant. The scene was a picture of stillness, almost too calm for comfort. Holmes stood for a moment, his eyes scanning the manor with that trademark intensity of his. His gaze was sharp, penetrating the veil of fog as if he could see something hidden from the ordinary observer. He was waiting for something to stir, for some clue to reveal itself from within the mist. Watson, standing slightly behind him, felt a growing sense of unease. The atmosphere felt charged, as though the very air was pregnant with the promise of something significant, something beyond the normal realm of their investigations. "Do you see it, Watson?" Holmes's voice broke the silence, low and measured. Watson squinted into the distance, following the direction of Holmes's pointed finger. There, through the fog, the faintest of glows appeared, soft and flickering, just above the dark garden gates. It was a lantern, but unlike any ordinary lantern. Its light seemed to pulse with a strange rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, as if it was alive. "I see it," Watson replied, his voice laced with curiosity. "It is strange, isn't it? Almost ethereal. It doesn't seem quite real." Holmes nodded, a subtle gleam in his eyes. "Indeed. It is not a mere lamp, Watson. It is a lure. And the question we must answer is, what or who is it drawing in?" They moved closer, their steps muffled by the soft ground, each footfall swallowed by the dense fog that clung to the earth. Holmes, with his characteristic confidence, led the way, his senses alert to every shift in the atmosphere. The air felt heavy now, thick with expectation. Watson followed closely, his thoughts spinning around the strange lantern. He couldn't help but feel as though they were walking deeper into a story that had already begun, and one they had no choice but to finish. As they drew near to the lantern's faint glow, a figure appeared out of the mist. A woman dressed in a flowing gown of lavender, her steps slow and deliberate, as if she were moving in a dream. Her face was hidden beneath the delicate veil of her bonnet, but the graceful sway of her movements was unmistakable. She seemed oblivious to the two men who watched from the shadows, her focus entirely on the lantern, which now burned brightly as she approached. Holmes and Watson remained still, barely breathing, as they watched the figure step closer to the lantern. The woman's hands trembled as she reached out, her fingers brushing the lantern's metal frame. For a moment, everything was still. The fog, the night, and even the lantern seemed to hold their breath. Then, with a soft click, the lantern's light flickered, once, twice, before it was extinguished. Darkness. The woman stood there motionless, in the blackness, as if waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Watson, ever the observer, took a step forward. "Holmes, what's happening? Why did the light go out?" Before Holmes could answer, a sharp, anguished cry pierced the silence, a high, mournful sound that seemed to carry with it all the despair and sorrow of a lost soul. It echoed through the fog, reverberating off the trees and walls of the estate until it faded into the distance, leaving an oppressive silence behind. The woman had vanished. Holmes stood frozen for a moment, his eyes narrowed as if he were trying to process what had just occurred. Watson, however, felt his heart race. The air seemed heavier now, laden with an inexplicable tension. The smell of lavender lingered in the stillness, more intense than before, as though the very earth itself had absorbed the scent. "Holmes, where has she gone? What is this place?" Holmes turned to Watson, his expression unreadable. "She has not gone far, Watson. Not physically. The lantern does not merely vanish. It leads, guides those who seek it. And the cry you heard, that was the sound of someone who has been claimed." "Claimed?" Watson repeated, his voice tinged with disbelief. "By the lantern?" "Yes," Holmes replied, his tone soft but with a finality that left no room for argument. "The lantern does not simply disappear. It beckons. It calls to those who are drawn to it, and in return, it takes them. But not in the way we might expect." Watson's mind struggled to understand. But why would she go? Why would anyone? Holmes took a step toward the spot where the woman had stood, crouching slightly to examine the ground. He ran his fingers through the damp earth, searching. His eyes lit up as he found something. A faint footprint, barely visible, hidden beneath a layer of mist. "She is not lost, Watson," Holmes said, his voice more measured now, as he rose and dusted off his hands. "She is following a path that is not of this world. The lantern is no ordinary object. It is a guide, leading those it touches to something else." Watson felt a chill run down his spine. Something in Holmes's words resonated deeply, a warning buried within the strange calmness of his delivery. This was no ordinary case. They were not just investigating a disappearance. They were uncovering a mystery that stretched beyond the natural world, where logic and reason could scarcely reach. "We must find her, Holmes," Watson said, his voice filled with urgency. "We must understand what this lantern is truly capable of," Holmes nodded, the fire of determination rekindling in his eyes. "Yes, Watson, and we shall. But be warned, This is no ordinary mystery. The lantern has its own rhythm, its own rules. We must learn them, or we risk being lost ourselves. With that, they turned back toward the fog-enshrouded garden, each step pulling them deeper into a world of shadows and whispers. The lantern was waiting, and its silent promise was one they would soon come to understand, whether they were ready or not. The suspense hung in the air, thick and heavy, as Holmes and Watson moved toward the unknown. Chapter 3. The Missing Heir. The morning after their encounter with the mysterious lantern, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson found themselves once again within the walls of 221B Baker Street. The air was crisp, the fog of the previous night lifting to reveal a pale, muted sunlight that filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. The fire, now reduced to embers, flickered gently in the hearth. Yet, despite the serenity of the scene, an undercurrent of unease seemed to hang in the air, a quiet tension that neither Holmes nor Watson could ignore. The sound of a soft knock on the door broke the silence. Watson, who had been carefully inspecting the morning papers, looked up, his attention immediately shifting. Holmes, however, didn't seem to move, his eyes fixed on the distant street, his mind already working through the puzzle they had uncovered. He knew that the next piece of the mystery was about to present itself. "Enter," Holmes called, his voice calm but tinged with an unspoken expectation. The door creaked open to reveal a tall, distinguished man. His clothes were impeccably tailored, his face drawn with worry. But it was the palpable tension in his posture that spoke volumes. His gaze locked onto Holmes with a sense of both desperation and respect, as if he had come to a man who he believed could unravel the very thread of his despair. "I am Lord Bramley," the man said, his voice filled with an urgent, almost pleading tone. "I've heard of your reputation, Mr. Holmes, and I need your help. My daughter, my only daughter, has vanished. I fear that the same fate has befallen her as those others you may have heard of, the ones who disappear near the lantern. I believe she is the next target." Watson immediately stood and moved toward the man, his natural instinct to offer comfort kicking in. "Please, sir, tell us everything. We may be able to help you." Lord Bramley took a deep breath, his hand trembling slightly as he adjusted his coat. "It began just a week ago," he said. "Lady Victoria, my daughter, has been acting strangely. Her mood, her behavior. It was as if she was drawn to something we could not see. She would often stand by the windows late at night, staring out into the fog, and I could see her gazing toward the old manor at the edge of the estate, where that accursed lantern has appeared. And now, she is gone." A cold silence fell over the room as the significance of Lord Bramley's words sank in. Holmes, as always, was the first to break the stillness. His voice was calm, almost soothing, but there was an undeniable edge to it. "You believe that the lantern is somehow involved in your daughter's disappearance?" Holmes asked, his sharp eyes fixed on Lord Bramley. "Yes," the nobleman answered, his voice filled with conviction. "I have seen her there, near the garden, standing in front of the lantern. I even called out to her once, but she didn't respond. She simply stood there, as if in a trance, before the light faded. And then, nothing. She was gone." Watson glanced at Holmes, his concern mirrored in his expression. "And you've had no word of her since?" "No word at all," Lord Bramley replied, his eyes dark with worry. "We've searched every corner of the estate. There are no signs of struggle, no clue as to where she has gone. The staff, too, are on edge, but no one has seen her. I fear that whatever this lantern is, it has taken her just as it has taken others." Holmes remained silent for a moment, his mind whirring as he absorbed the gravity of the situation. The connection was becoming clearer by the minute. The lantern, a strange, otherworldly presence that called to its victims, was now tied to the disappearance of Lady Victoria. But how and why? "We must visit the manor," Holmes said at last, standing up from his chair with his usual calm precision. "If your daughter has indeed been taken by the lantern, there may be something at the estate that will provide us with the answers we need." "We cannot waste any more time," Lord Bramley nodded in gratitude. "I will take you there immediately, Mr. Holmes. I trust you will find the truth." The journey to the manor was a quiet one. The mist hung thick in the air, as though the very sky itself was draped in layers of fog, obscuring the world beyond. The journey took them through winding lanes and dense woodlands, the path growing narrower as they approached the estate. The grandeur of the manor grew more imposing with every step they took, the ivy-clad stone walls seeming to loom ominously in the distance. When they arrived, Lord Bramley led them to the garden, the very place where Lady Victoria had last been seen. The lantern was not there now, but the scent of lavender lingered faintly in the air. Watson instinctively took a deep breath, as if the smell itself was somehow both soothing and unsettling. It was an odd fragrance, one that seemed to fill the senses in a way that was both familiar and foreign. Holmes knelt by the overgrown bushes, his fingers brushing against the dew-covered leaves. He scanned the area methodically, each movement purposeful and measured. There was something hidden here, something beneath the surface. The scent of lavender was too persistent, too pervasive to be merely a coincidence. It clung to the very earth, as though the land itself was marked by the presence of the lantern. "We are not dealing with a mere physical disappearance," Holmes murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "Whatever this lantern is, it seems to create a kind of imprint. It leaves behind a trace, a signature of sorts, and Lady Victoria was the one chosen to follow it." Lord Bramley's face grew pale. "What do you mean? Is there no hope for her?" Holmes looked up at the man, his expression sombre but resolute. "There is always hope, Lord Bramley. But we must understand the nature of this lantern, this force that compels people to follow it. We must learn its pattern, its rhythm, if we are to find her before it is too late." As they continued to search, a soft sound broke the quiet, the faintest rustle of leaves, as if something, or someone, was moving nearby. Holmes's head snapped toward the sound, his sharp eyes narrowing as he instinctively reached for his pocket watch. A figure emerged from the shadows. The woman was dressed in a flowing lavender gown, her face partially obscured by a veil. She moved toward them with a serene, almost hypnotic grace, her steps slow and deliberate, as though guided by an invisible force. Her hands, delicate and pale, reached out to touch the lantern's base, and as she did, the faintest glow seemed to pulse from the light. Holmes stepped forward, his voice steady and calm. "Who are you?" The woman paused, her eyes flickering up to meet his. For a moment, there was no recognition in her expression, only a kind of distant understanding, as though she had already known they would be there. "I am the one who was meant to be found," she said softly, her voice as gentle as the evening breeze. "I have been waiting." Holmes took a step back, his eyes narrowing. "Waiting? Waiting for what?" "The lantern calls to us all," she replied, her gaze distant. "It brings us to the place where we are meant to rest. Lady Victoria was only the first. Others will follow." Watson felt a chill run through him as the woman's words settled in. There was something otherworldly about her, something that didn't belong to the natural world. She was a part of the mystery, a piece of the puzzle that they had yet to fully understand. Holmes's mind was racing, but he knew that the answers were not far off. They had to uncover the truth behind the lantern before it claimed another soul. As the woman stepped away, the lantern's light flickered once more, casting long, wavering shadows across the garden. A new sense of urgency filled the air. Holmes was determined. "The game has only just begun, Watson. But I believe we are closer than ever to understanding what truly lies behind the lantern's silent promise." The mystery was deepening, and the path forward was shrouded in darkness. But one thing was certain. Holmes would stop at nothing to bring the truth to light. Chapter 4. The Scent of Lavender. The morning after their visit to the manor, Holmes and Watson sat in their familiar seats in 221B Baker Street. The day had dawned pale and quiet, with only the faintest trace of sunlight filtering through the window, casting soft rays across the room. A gentle wind outside stirred the leaves in the trees, but inside, everything was still. Holmes sat, his brow furrowed in concentration, as if the events of the previous night were a riddle he had yet to solve. Watson, still troubled by the strange events they had witnessed, watched his companion closely. The mystery of the lantern had taken on an unsettling new dimension. Each time they ventured deeper into the investigation, they uncovered more questions than answers. "Holmes," Watson finally spoke, his voice laced with concern. "That woman at the manor, she knew more than she let on. What do you think she meant when she said the lantern calls to us all?" Holmes, without looking up, replied in his usual calm, methodical way. "I believe, Watson, that the lantern is not just an object of light. It is something more, something that draws people to it. It has power, an influence that seems to transcend the physical world. The woman, the one dressed in lavender, was not merely a victim. She is a guide of sorts, leading others to the lantern's promise. But why? And what exactly does the lantern promise?" Watson asked, his voice growing more anxious. "What happens to those who follow it?" Holmes paused for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his teacup. "That, Watson, is the heart of this mystery. The lantern does not simply lure people away. It offers something intangible, perhaps peace, perhaps release from some inner torment. Whatever it is, it compels people like Lady Victoria to follow it. But we have yet to understand what lies at the end of this path." Before Watson could reply, there came a sharp knock on the door. Both men turned, and Watson stood, moving to answer it. When he opened the door, it was none other than Lord Bramley who stood there, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and exhaustion. "I must speak with you, Mr. Holmes," Lord Bramley said urgently, his voice tight. "It's Victoria. She's gone again. This time, I fear, she has vanished for good." Holmes stood instantly, his calm demeanour never wavering, though the seriousness of the situation was evident. "What has happened? Where was she last seen?" Lord Bramley's gaze flickered nervously toward the street, as though the mere act of speaking of his daughter's disappearance was an admission of helplessness. "I found her last night, standing near the same spot where the lantern appeared. She was as still as a statue staring at it. And then, when I tried to approach, she vanished. Not into thin air, but into the mist, like the lantern itself had swallowed her up. I believe she is lost to us, forever." Holmes's face remained unreadable, but the gleam in his eyes told Watson that his mind was already at work. He had begun to see the connections, the threads of the case that were pulling him closer to an answer. "Lord Bramley," Holmes said after a moment of contemplation, "we must return to the manor. The lantern is the key to this mystery, and I believe that there is something we are missing, something we have not yet understood. The three of them made their way back to the manor as the day's light faded, the fog creeping once more over the landscape. The air was damp, heavy with moisture, and the scent of lavender lingered faintly on the wind. The estate appeared even more imposing under the cover of dusk, the stone walls dark and sombre against the backdrop of a sky that seemed to close in on them. Holmes, Watson, and Lord Bramley walked silently through the garden, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth. The faint glow of the lantern appeared once again in the distance, casting a soft, rhythmic light through the fog. Holmes's eyes narrowed as he observed the lantern's flicker. There was something different about it this time, something purposeful. Lord Bramley led them to the very spot where he had last seen Lady Victoria. It was here, amid the overgrown bushes, that she had vanished before. But now the air seemed charged with something more, something unseen that pressed against their skin and clung to their senses. Holmes knelt down, his sharp eyes scanning the ground. He ran his fingers lightly over the damp earth, his mind working through the patterns of the night. The familiar scent of lavender, once so faint, now seemed stronger than ever, filling the air around them with a strange, heady perfume. It was almost as if the very earth itself carried the scent, as if it had become part of the landscape. "Watson," Holmes said quietly, "do you notice it?" Watson inhaled deeply, his senses attuned to the strange fragrance. "Yes, it's much stronger now." Almost overwhelming, Holmes's gaze lifted from the ground to the lantern ahead. "This scent, it's no coincidence. It's part of the lantern's presence. I believe it's a signature, a clue, if you will. The lavender is not just a scent, it is a mark left by the lantern, and it is this mark that leads us forward." As Holmes stood, he turned to Lord Bramley, who was watching him with a mix of hope and fear. "You must trust me, Lord Bramley. The lantern is drawing us closer to the truth, and we are on the brink of discovering its secret." The three men made their way through the estate, their steps slow and deliberate as they approached the location of the lantern's light. Holmes was uncharacteristically quiet, his thoughts wrapped in the puzzle he was piecing together. He seemed almost distant, his mind far ahead of them as he navigated the foggy night. Finally, they reached the garden's edge, where the lantern's soft light danced in the mist, beckoning them closer. Holmes stopped, his eyes scanning the ground once more. There was something about the way the light flickered tonight, something different. Holmes turned to Watson and Lord Bramley. "I believe we are about to witness something that will answer all our questions, but we must remain patient and observant. The lantern reveals its secrets in its own time, and we are at the threshold." As they waited, the lantern flickered once more, and this time it did not fade. Instead, it grew brighter, the glow intensifying with each passing second. The air thickened with the scent of lavender, and for a brief moment it felt as though the garden itself was alive, pulsing with energy. Then, just as suddenly as the light had grown, it dimmed, and with that, a figure emerged from the shadows, a figure in a lavender gown. It was Lady Victoria. Holmes stepped forward, his expression calm, though his mind was racing. "Lady Victoria," he called softly, "you are safe now. We've come for you." But as the woman turned to face them, her expression was not one of recognition. It was distant, as if she was seeing them from a faraway place. Her eyes seemed vacant, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond them. "I have waited," she whispered, her voice soft and almost dreamlike. "I have followed the lantern, and now I am where I belong." Holmes's heart skipped a beat. The lantern had done its work. But the true question now was, what exactly had it promised her? What had she gained by following it? The mystery was deepening with each passing moment. Holmes knew that they were closer than ever to understanding the true nature of the lantern and the fate that awaited those who were drawn into its glow. But the answers were still elusive, like the fog that surrounded them, shifting and changing with each step they took. In the quiet stillness of the garden, as Lady Victoria stood silently in front of them, the lantern's soft glow continued to pulse, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. The scent of lavender filled the air, and Holmes knew that the time had come to face the truth. But would they be ready for what they would find? Chapter 5. The Lantern's Secret. The fog had thickened by the time Holmes, Watson and Lord Bramley made their way back to the manor's garden. The air was heavy with a chill that seemed to seep into their bones. But Holmes remained unfazed, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, as though searching for something hidden just beyond the reach of the human eye. The faint scent of lavender lingered in the air, a reminder of the eerie mystery that had drawn them here. Lady Victoria, who had reappeared before them, stood still as though waiting for something. Her expression, though vacant, was not one of terror or confusion. Instead, there was an unsettling calm in her demeanor. She seemed to be detached from the world around her, lost in a trance-like state, as though she were caught between two realities. Holmes observed her carefully, his mind working through the puzzle. "Lady Victoria," he said, his voice calm and soothing. "You have returned, but your eyes tell a different story. Can you hear me?" For a moment, there was no response. The woman simply stood, her eyes fixed on the lantern's flickering light, as if drawn to it like a moth to a flame. The lantern's glow danced across her face, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to distort her features, making her appear almost otherworldly. Watson, unable to contain his concern, stepped forward. "Lady Victoria, what has happened to you? Where have you been? You're safe now." But the woman did not react. It was as if her mind was no longer in the present moment. Her lips parted, but her words were soft, distant, like the murmur of a dream. "I have followed it, the lantern," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the gentle rustling of the fog. "It calls, and I must obey. It has shown me the way Holmes's gaze never wavered from her." "The way to what, Lady Victoria? What has the lantern promised you?" Her eyes glazed over as though the question itself was not meant for her, her focus returning to the lantern's ethereal light. "I have seen peace, Mr. Holmes. The lantern. It shows the way to peace. I am at peace now." There was something deeply unsettling in her words, something that suggested a truth Holmes was only beginning to comprehend. The lantern, it seemed, was more than just a source of light. It was a guide, one that led its followers to a place beyond this world, a place of rest, of release. But what was it exactly that the lantern offered? And why were those who followed it so eager to find that peace? Holmes's sharp mind raced. He knew they were on the brink of something profound, something that went beyond mere disappearance. The lantern was not just a mysterious object, it was a force, one that was capable of drawing people into its fold, offering them something that they could not resist. "Lord Bramley," Holmes said, his voice steady, yet tinged with urgency. "What do you know of this lantern? Have you ever seen it before your daughter's disappearance?" Lord Bramley hesitated, as if struggling with the weight of his own words. I've heard stories, Mr. Holmes. Old legends about the lantern, tales passed down through generations in my family. But I never believed them. I thought they were nothing more than superstition. The lantern is said to appear to those who are troubled, those who are seeking something. It's a relic of the past, tied to old rituals that no one in my family has truly understood. Holmes's eyes widened slightly. "Rituals? What kind of rituals, Lord Bramley? The nobleman lowered his gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. There are stories of people who were lost, broken in some way, being drawn to the lantern. It is said to call to them, offering them peace, offering them the chance to escape their troubles. But no one ever returns. They vanish, and the lantern is never seen again. A cold silence filled the air as the implications of Lord Bramley's words settled in. The lantern was not simply a means of disappearance. It was an agent of transformation, offering its followers release from whatever burden they carried. But at what cost? And why had it chosen Lady Victoria? Holmes stood still for a moment, his thoughts a whirlwind. He looked at Lady Victoria, still entranced by the lantern's glow, her face soft with the expression of someone who had finally found what they were searching for. She was at peace, but it was a peace that seemed to come at a terrible price. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice calm but resolute, "this is no ordinary mystery. The lantern is not a simple object of light. It is a symbol, a force, perhaps even a gateway. It is tied to something much deeper than we could have imagined. We must uncover its origins, its true nature." Watson, still grappling with the enormity of the situation, nodded slowly. "But how, Holmes? How do we stop it? How do we bring her back?" Holmes turned to face him, his eyes steady and filled with purpose. "We cannot stop the lantern, Watson. It is not something that can be destroyed or contained. But what we can do is understand it. We can uncover its secret, and in doing so, we may find a way to save Lady Victoria and those like her." The wind picked up, sending a swirl of mist across the garden, but Holmes did not flinch. He was already deep in thought, considering the steps they needed to take. He could feel the lantern's pull, the weight of its mystery pressing down on them. "Tonight, we will stay here," Holmes continued, his voice firm. "We will watch the lantern, observe its behavior. The answers lie within its patterns, and we must be ready to follow where it leads." The fog thickened around them, the lantern's glow becoming the only source of light in the surrounding darkness. Its flicker seemed to pulse with a rhythm all its own, as though it were breathing, alive in its own way. And as Holmes, Watson, and Lord Bramley stood there in the quiet of the night, they knew they were about to uncover something far greater than any of them had anticipated. They had crossed a threshold, and there would be no turning back. As they settled in, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the lantern to reveal its next move, the night seemed to stretch on endlessly. The fog clung to the earth, thickening around them, but the lantern's glow remained a constant beacon in the distance, pulling them forward. Holmes's thoughts were sharp and clear, and though the situation was dire, he found a strange comfort in the challenge before them. This was the kind of mystery that tested everything he knew about the world, its rules, its boundaries, and he would not rest until he had unraveled the truth behind the lantern. And so, they waited. The lantern flickered. The night held its breath. And soon, the answers would come. Chapter 6. The Hidden Chamber. The night had settled into an eerie stillness as Holmes, Watson, and Lord Bramley remained hidden in the shadows, watching the lantern. The fog had grown thicker, now hanging in the air like a heavy blanket that muffled even the softest sound. The garden around them seemed to hold its breath, its leaves and branches frozen in the cool embrace of the mist. The only movement was the gentle flicker of the lantern's light, casting long shadows that danced across the ground. Holmes's sharp eyes were focused intently on the lantern. Its glow was soft, but its pulse seemed to grow more rhythmic, more deliberate with each passing moment. There was something alive about the light, a strange energy that felt like a silent invitation, pulling them deeper into the mystery. "Holmes," Watson whispered, breaking the silence, his voice barely audible over the faint rustling of the fog. What do you think it is? What is this lantern really? Holmes didn't immediately answer, his gaze fixed on the lantern, studying its every movement, as though trying to unlock its hidden secrets. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he spoke, his voice low but filled with conviction. I don't think this lantern is simply an object, Watson. It's a conduit, a doorway perhaps, leading to something beyond our comprehension. Whatever force is behind it, it is not natural. It beckons those who are lost, those who are searching for something. But it offers more than peace. It offers a finality, a release from the world they knew. Watson's heart sank. He understood the gravity of Holmes's words. This was no ordinary mystery. The lantern wasn't just drawing people in, it was changing them, leading them to an irreversible fate. But what was it truly offering them, and why had it chosen Lady Victoria? And now that she was caught in its thrall, could she ever be freed? Suddenly, without warning, the lantern's light flickered violently, as if it were struggling against something. The soft pulse that had marked its rhythm now became erratic, the glow intensifying and dimming in quick succession. It was as though the very air around them had shifted, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Holmes stepped forward, his movements deliberate and calculated, as though he had anticipated this change. Watch closely, Watson. This is no ordinary occurrence. The lantern is about to reveal something. As if on cue, the ground beneath their feet trembled faintly. The soft earth shifted, and a low, rumbling sound echoed from deep within the garden. It was distant at first, but it grew louder, until the very ground seemed to groan under the weight of something hidden. "Do you hear that?" Watson whispered, his eyes wide with alarm. Holmes nodded, his mind racing. "It's a sound from below. Something is moving beneath the garden, something that has been buried for a long time." The lantern's light flickered once more, and then, as if responding to the growing rumble, the ground in front of them began to shift. The earth parted with a soft groan, and a hidden passageway slowly began to emerge from beneath the garden. The walls of the opening were made of stone, ancient and weathered, covered in thick ivy and moss. The passage seemed to descend deep into the earth, its depths hidden from sight. The lantern's light seemed to pulse with a finality now, its glow brightening as the earth split open. There was no longer any doubt. The lantern had not only led them here, it had unlocked something, revealing a hidden chamber beneath the manor that had been sealed away for centuries. Holmes didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his footsteps sure and steady as he approached the dark opening. "This is it, Watson. This is where the answers lie." Watson hesitated for a moment, the air thick with suspense, but then followed Holmes, his heart pounding in his chest. Lord Bramley, too, stood by them, his face a mask of anxiety and fear. "Do you believe that my daughter is down there?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. Holmes turned to face him, his expression steady and calm. "I believe that the lantern has brought us to a place where we can finally understand its purpose. Whether Lady Victoria is down there, I cannot say, but I am certain that whatever happens next will reveal the truth." Without another word, the three of them descended into the hidden chamber, the air growing cooler and damper as they moved deeper beneath the earth. The passage was narrow, the walls jagged and uneven, but the lantern's light guided their way. Its glow was faint now, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally along the walls. As they reached the bottom of the passage, they emerged into a vast, cavernous space. The chamber was unlike anything they had seen before. It was ancient, the walls lined with intricate carvings and symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light. The air was thick with the scent of earth and stone, but over it all hung the unmistakable fragrance of lavender, a scent that seemed to have permeated every corner of this underground world. At the center of the chamber, the lantern's light grew brighter once more, casting an eerie glow on the ground beneath it. In the center of the room, an altar-like structure stood, its surface covered in worn symbols. The carvings on the stone appeared to be ancient, older than any relic Holmes had ever encountered. Holmes approached the altar slowly, his eyes scanning the walls and the floor with a careful intensity. "This is where it began," he murmured. "The lantern, this place, it's all connected. The carvings here tell a story of those who sought peace, those who followed the lantern's call." Watson moved closer to the altar, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch one of the symbols. As his fingers brushed against the stone, the ground beneath them rumbled again, but this time the sound was different, clearer, more purposeful. A low, haunting whisper filled the air, as though the very walls of the chamber were speaking, but in a language that none of them could understand. The lantern flickered once more, and then, with a sudden rush, the light grew blindingly bright. For a moment, there was nothing but the light. It enveloped them, filling every corner of the room with an intensity that left them momentarily blind. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the light dimmed, and everything fell silent. In the center of the room stood a figure, Lady Victoria. She was no longer the woman they had seen earlier, entranced by the lantern. She stood upright, her eyes wide open, her gaze fixed on the altar. But she was different now. There was a calmness to her, an eerie peace that radiated from her being. It was as if she had found the very thing the lantern had promised: the release, the finality, the peace. Holmes stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with an unspoken sadness. "Lady Victoria, you have returned." Her eyes slowly turned to meet his, but there was no recognition in them. Instead, she smiled, a serene, almost detached smile. "I have found it," she said softly, her voice echoing through the chamber. "I have found the peace the lantern promised. There is no more fear, no more pain, only rest." A shiver ran through Watson as he watched her, the words settling in his mind like a heavy weight. The lantern had not just drawn her in, it had taken her, body and soul. She had found peace, but it was a peace that came at a terrible price. Holmes turned to Watson, his expression solemn. "This is what the lantern offers, release from the world of the living, but at the cost of everything that makes us human. The lantern does not simply lead its followers to peace, it offers them an escape, a permanent one." The air in the chamber grew thick with the weight of the truth. The lantern had shown them its power, its promise, but the price of that promise was greater than they had ever imagined. And now, with Lady Victoria standing before them, they realized that the true mystery was not about finding those who had vanished. It was about understanding what happened to those who followed the lantern, and whether there was any way to bring them back from the peace they had sought. The mystery had deepened, and they were now on the precipice of something even more dangerous, something that neither of them had expected. Chapter 7. The Return of Lady Victoria. The underground chamber pulsed with a quiet tension, the air thick with the fragrance of lavender and the unspoken weight of the revelation before them. Lady Victoria stood at the center of the altar, her posture serene, her eyes still wide with an unsettling calm. The glow of the lantern seemed to wrap around her like a protective cocoon, casting long shadows against the stone walls. But despite the tranquility that radiated from her, there was a darkness beneath it, an ominous undertone that Holmes and Watson could not ignore. Holmes remained still, his piercing eyes never leaving Lady Victoria's face. He had seen many strange things in his time, but nothing quite like this. The peace that emanated from her was almost otherworldly, as if she had transcended something that no one should ever have to face. It was a release, yes, but a release with a price. Watson stepped forward, his heart heavy with concern. "Lady Victoria," he said softly, his voice filled with empathy. "What happened to you? Why are you like this?" Her gaze shifted slowly to him, but her eyes were distant, unfocused, as though she were looking through him, not at him. Her lips parted, but the words that escaped were not the ones Watson had expected. "I am at peace now, Dr. Watson," she murmured, her voice like a dream, barely audible in the heavy silence of the chamber. "The lantern has shown me the way. There is nothing left but rest." Holmes watched intently, his mind working through the layers of mystery that surrounded her words. Peace, he realized, was not just the absence of turmoil. It was the absence of everything. The lantern had offered her an escape, but it was not the kind of escape that restored life. It was an escape from life itself. "Rest," Watson repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "But what about your family? Your life? What of all the things you once cared for?" Lady Victoria's gaze flickered to Lord Bramley, who stood frozen in the shadows, his face pale with both grief and confusion. "I do not remember them," she said simply. "I remember the lantern. I remember the peace it gave me. Everything else is distant. I am not the same." The room seemed to grow colder with her words, a chill that crept into the bones of both Watson and Lord Bramley. For a moment there was nothing but silence, deep, suffocating silence. Then Holmes spoke, his voice steady but laced with something darker. "This is no ordinary disappearance," he said, turning his gaze from Lady Victoria to Watson. "The lantern does not simply take people away. It erases them piece by piece until nothing is left but the body, a shell empty of all the memories and emotions that once made them who they were." Watson took a step back, his mind racing. But how can this be? How can something as simple as a lantern cause such a profound change? What is it doing to them? Holmes's expression darkened as he turned to face Watson. "It's not just a lantern, Watson. It is a symbol, a gateway to something far older, far more dangerous. Whatever force is behind it has been manipulating those who seek its light, offering them release from the pain of the world. But in return, it takes everything. Their memories, their emotions, their very essence. All that is left is the physical form, the body of the person who was once there." Lord Bramley stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Is there any hope for her? Can we bring her back?" Holmes shook his head slowly. "I'm afraid the lady you knew is no longer here, Lord Bramley. What stands before us is but a shadow of what once was. The lantern has done its work, taken her away piece by piece, until there is nothing left but this hollow, peaceful figure." Lady Victoria's smile remained unchanged as she stood, disconnected from the world around her. She was no longer the daughter Lord Bramley had once known. She was something else, something lost, something beyond reach. Holmes turned back to the altar, his eyes scanning the symbols carved into the stone. They seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the lantern, as though they were calling to him, urging him to understand. "This altar," Holmes murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "These carvings, they're part of a ritual that binds the lantern to those who follow it. This is not a simple mystery, Watson. The lantern is part of something ancient, something that has been forgotten by most, a promise made long ago, a promise that costs more than anyone could have anticipated. Watson, still reeling from the revelation, struggled to make sense of the situation. But why does the lantern do this? Why does it offer peace at such a cost? Holmes's gaze softened, his voice low and almost sorrowful. Because, Watson, peace is the greatest temptation. When people are lost, when they are broken, the lantern offers them something they cannot refuse, a way out. But in taking the way out, they lose everything that makes them who they are. They cease to exist in any real sense. What remains is only an echo of what was. There was a long pause as the weight of Holmes's words settled on them. The lantern, which had once seemed like a simple object of mystery, was now revealed to be a force far beyond their understanding. It did not merely disappear people, it consumed them, leaving behind a hollow shell that was at peace, but utterly devoid of life. Holmes turned to Lady Victoria, his eyes searching her face, trying to find some sign of the woman she had once been. "Lady Victoria," he said softly, "can you hear me?" Her eyes flickered, and for a brief moment it seemed as though something human, was beginning to stir behind her vacant gaze. "I hear you," she whispered, but her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "But I do not understand." The silence that followed was deafening. Lord Bramley stood there, his face stricken with grief and disbelief, while Watson tried to come to terms with the enormity of what they were facing. This was not just a mystery to be solved, it was a force, a power that had been at work long before they had ever stumbled upon it. Holmes took a deep breath, his mind racing. There is no reversing what the lantern has done. Once someone has followed it, once they have embraced its promise, they are lost. But perhaps... He trailed off, his voice quieter now, filled with a new sense of determination. Perhaps there is something we can do to stop it from claiming more victims. Watson, still struggling to comprehend the full extent of the lantern's power, asked, "What do you mean? How can we stop it?" Holmes turned toward Watson, his expression resolute. "We must uncover the source of the lantern's power. There must be something, someone, behind it. This cannot be the work of an object alone. We need to find the origins of the ritual, the force that compels the lantern to act. Only then can we hope to stop it from taking anyone else." The air in the chamber grew colder, the lantern's light flickering as if in response to Holmes's words. Lady Victoria's smile never wavered, but her eyes were now vacant, fixed on the lantern, as though it had become the center of her world. Holmes took one last look at the altar, his gaze lingering on the ancient symbols carved into the stone. The truth, Watson, lies buried beneath this place. We must find it, and we must find it soon, before the lantern claims anyone else. As they made their way out of the chamber, the ground rumbled once more, the air thick with the weight of the mystery they were only beginning to understand. The lantern's light continued to pulse in the distance, a beacon that promised peace, but a peace that came at a devastating cost. The mystery had deepened, and Holmes knew that the path ahead would lead them into even darker territory. But there was no turning back now. The lantern's secret was out, and they would uncover it, no matter what the cost. Chapter 8. The Gathering Shadows. The night grew colder as Holmes, Watson and Lord Bramley made their way back from the hidden chamber beneath the manor. The fog, thick as ever, clung to the landscape like a ghost, swirling around their feet as they walked, muffling their steps. The lantern, still glowing softly in the distance, seemed to call to them as it had done for so many before. Its pulse was steady now, its light no longer erratic, but there was an unsettling stillness to the atmosphere, one that weighed heavily on them all. Holmes walked ahead, his gaze focused on the faint glow of the lantern, but his mind was far beyond the physical world around him. There was something about the night, something about the manner in which the fog clung to the ground, that suggested the very world was holding its breath, waiting for something, some final revelation. "What now, Holmes?" Watson asked quietly, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty. He was still grappling with the enormity of what they had uncovered, but there was no denying that Holmes's calm demeanour seemed to offer a small thread of reassurance. Holmes didn't look at him immediately, but instead paused, his silhouette framed by the faint lantern light. The flickering light played on his sharp features, making his expression seem unreadable. When he spoke, it was with a quiet conviction, as though he had already made his decision. "We must return to the manor," Holmes said, his voice measured. "The lantern is not just an object. It is a catalyst, one that has begun to draw us into something far greater than we could have anticipated. We cannot let Lady Victoria's fate become that of others. We must find the source of its power." Lord Bramley, who had been silent for much of the journey, now spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't understand, Mr. Holmes. You've said it yourself. My daughter is no longer the person she once was. She has been lost to the lantern's influence. What is there left to find?" Holmes turned to him then, his eyes sharp and unwavering. "What has been lost, Lord Bramley, can be found again. But we must first understand the lantern for what it truly is, something far beyond an ordinary object, something that has been calling to those who are lost, drawing them into its power, and we must stop it." The journey back to the manor was marked by an unspoken tension. The fog thickened around them, and the once serene garden now felt oppressive, as though the shadows were closing in around them. The lantern's light, once so inviting, now seemed like a siren call, echoing through the mist, urging them to follow, to understand its true nature. As they entered the manor, the grand estate loomed behind them, its towering walls casting long, jagged shadows. The front door creaked open with an unsettling groan, and they stepped inside, the chill of the stone floors seeping into their bones. Everything in the manor felt distant, as though it had been untouched by time, frozen in a moment that had long since passed. Holmes moved with purpose, leading them through the halls toward the study, the room where Lord Bramley had first spoken of the lantern's origins. As they approached, the flickering light from the lantern seemed to call louder, its presence growing stronger with each step they took. The air around them felt heavier, the silence pressing against their ears, as though the manor itself was holding its breath. Inside the study, Holmes immediately began to pace, his fingers tapping lightly against his chin as he thought. The room, filled with books and ancient artifacts, held the unmistakable scent of dust and age. The walls were adorned with paintings of long-dead ancestors, their eyes following their movements with silent judgment. Yet amidst the timeless elegance, there was a feeling of foreboding, like something dark was hidden beneath the layers of history. "Holmes," Watson began, his voice low, "what is it that we're looking for? You said the lantern is part of something much greater, something ancient. But what could it be?" Holmes paused, his sharp eyes flicking toward Watson, as though the question had only just reached his mind. "We are looking for the source of the lantern's power, Watson. It is no ordinary artifact. It is a relic, one tied to an ancient ritual, one that has long been forgotten by most. But it has never truly disappeared. It has always been here, hidden in plain sight." Holmes walked toward the far wall of the study, where a large tapestry hung. The colours had faded with age, but the figures woven into the fabric seemed almost alive, an intricate depiction of a ceremony, with figures gathered around a lantern, their hands reaching out as if drawn toward the light. The image was almost surreal, as though it were not just a painting, but a memory caught in time. "This," Holmes murmured, "is where it all began. These figures, these people, they were the ones who first discovered the lantern's power, and they knew what it could do. They knew the cost." Watson stepped closer to examine the tapestry. But why would anyone willingly seek something so dangerous? The lantern. It has destroyed lives. It's taken everything from those who have followed it. Holmes nodded, his eyes darkening. "Because it offers what every soul desires, Watson. It offers peace, escape from the burdens of the world. But in exchange, it takes everything, their memories, their very essence. And the lantern does not stop. It continues to draw in the lost, those who are searching for solace. But once they follow, there is no turning back." As Holmes studied the tapestry, a low, haunting whisper seemed to echo through the room. It was faint at first, but gradually it grew louder, an unintelligible murmur that filled the space with an eerie sense of dread. It was as though the very walls were speaking, urging them to listen, to understand the terrible truth that had been hidden here for so long. Holmes's face grew pale, his eyes narrowing. The ritual. It's not just a ritual. It's a binding, a covenant perhaps. The lantern is more than an object. It is a force, one that exists beyond our understanding. And it has been waiting for centuries to claim those who are lost. Suddenly the lantern's light, still burning outside, flared brighter. Its glow poured through the study's windows, casting long, stretching shadows on the walls. The whispering grew louder, now a chorus of voices that seemed to call from the darkness. Holmes's expression hardened. "We have to go. The lantern is calling us, Watson, and this time we must follow." The three of them exited the study and made their way back to the garden, where the lantern's glow beckoned them like a beacon in the fog. The air was thick with tension, and the faint scent of lavender clung to everything, wrapping around them like a shroud. As they approached the lantern, the figure of Lady Victoria appeared once again, standing in front of it. She was not alone. Around her, the fog had begun to swirl, and emerging from the mist were others, shadows, figures drawn to the lantern's light, as though it had become their home. Holmes's eyes flicked toward Watson and Lord Bramley, his voice a soft whisper. "It's not just Lady Victoria. The lantern has drawn others to it, others who have been lost, others who have followed its call." The figures gathered around the lantern stood in silence, their faces vacant, their eyes empty. They were not living, not truly alive. They were echoes, memories of those who had once been, now swallowed by the lantern's power. Watson's breath caught in his throat. "What do we do, Holmes? How do we stop it?" Holmes turned to face the gathering shadows, his expression grim but resolute. "We don't stop it, Watson. We understand it. And in doing so, we will uncover the final truth of the lantern's secret." The lantern's light grew brighter, its glow now blinding as it cast the garden in an otherworldly radiance. The shadows of the lost figures seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the lantern, each flicker a heartbeat, each movement a step toward something unknown. As the light engulfed them, Holmes, Watson, and Lord Bramley stood in the presence of the lantern's power, caught between the living and the dead, between the world of the living and whatever lay beyond. And as the last of the fog dissipated, the final piece of the puzzle was within reach. The mystery was far from over. The lantern had not revealed its full truth yet, but it was close. The answers, Holmes knew, lay just beyond the veil. The shadows were gathering, and the final revelation was about to unfold. Chapter 9. The final revelation. The night had deepened, and the fog around the manor had thickened to an almost impenetrable density. The lantern's light flickered like a heartbeat, casting an eerie glow that seemed to pulse with life of its own. The figures gathered around it stood motionless, their faces vacant, their eyes hollow yet somehow fixed on the lantern in rapt attention. The air was filled with an overwhelming stillness, thick with the scent of lavender, as though the very atmosphere had been infused by the lantern's presence. Holmes, Watson, and Lord Bramley stood in the midst of the garden, their forms partially obscured by the mist, observing the figures in silence. Each step closer to the lantern seemed to pull them deeper into the mystery, closer to the truth that Holmes had sensed all along. But even now, with everything laid bare, the lantern remained a puzzle wrapped in darkness. The answers they sought were just out of reach, veiled by something far older, far deeper than they could comprehend. Holmes stood still, his gaze fixed on Lady Victoria and the other figures who had gathered. His expression was calm, but there was a growing tension in his eyes, a tension that suggested he knew that the moment of revelation was near. He had always prided himself on his ability to solve mysteries, to see through the veils of deception, but this was different. The lantern was not merely a thing to be solved. It was a force, a presence, something that defied all conventional understanding. "Holmes," Watson whispered, his voice low and filled with a mixture of dread and wonder. "What do we do now?" Holmes did not respond immediately. His eyes swept over the figures, his mind calculating, his thoughts racing as he pieced together the last fragments of the mystery. Finally, he turned to Watson, his voice steady but filled with an underlying urgency. "We must uncover the source of the lantern's power, Watson. This is not simply a matter of finding the right clue or solving a riddle. The lantern is more than an object. It is a conduit, a gateway to something beyond the physical realm, and it has drawn us all here for a reason." Lord Bramley stepped forward, his face stricken with sorrow. "But why? Why has it chosen my daughter? Why has it taken her away from me?" Holmes turned to Lord Bramley, his eyes filled with empathy, but his mind remained focused on the task at hand. "The lantern does not choose its victims, Lord Bramley. It calls to those who are lost, those who are searching for peace. Your daughter, like the others, was drawn to it because of a deep need, a need for release, for escape. The lantern offers peace, but it comes at a cost. And that cost is everything, the very essence of who you are." Watson felt a chill run down his spine as he considered Holmes's words. The lantern's light was not a beacon of salvation. It was a promise, a dangerous promise that lured the desperate and the broken into its grasp. But it was not the kind of peace one would wish for. It was a peace that stripped away everything that made a person human, their memories, their emotions, their very soul. As Holmes spoke, the figures around the lantern began to move, their motions slow and deliberate, as though responding to some unseen force. Lady Victoria, too, began to step forward, her movements graceful but detached, as though she were no longer fully aware of her surroundings. "Holmes," Watson said softly. "They're walking toward it. They're following it willingly. It's as if they are drawn to it, compelled to go, as though they have no choice." Holmes nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the figures. "That's because they don't have a choice, Watson. The lantern does not simply beckon. It binds. Once you follow it, you are no longer free. You are part of its cycle, its ritual. There is no escape, no turning back." Watson swallowed hard, the gravity of Holmes's words settling over him like a weight. "But surely there must be something we can do. We can't just let this happen. We can't let the lantern claim any more lives." Holmes's expression softened, but his resolve remained firm. "There is one thing we can do, Watson. One thing that will stop this, once and for all." The air around them grew heavier, and the fog seemed to shift, as though the very atmosphere was responding to Holmes's words. The lantern's light pulsed in time with the growing tension, its glow brighter now, almost blinding in its intensity. It was as though the lantern was alive, pulsing with a rhythm, a heartbeat that resonated in their bones. The whispers from the shadows grew louder, swirling around them like voices in a distant dream. Holmes stepped forward, his movements deliberate. "This is it," he said, his voice a low murmur, almost reverent. "The lantern has revealed its true nature, but there is something we must do, something that has always been part of the ritual." Lord Bramley stepped forward, his face filled with confusion and desperation. "What do you mean, Mr. Holmes? What must we do?" Holmes turned to face him, his expression grave. "We must extinguish the lantern's light." Watson's eyes widened in disbelief. "But that would destroy everything, wouldn't it?" "The lantern, the peace it promises, everything that has drawn these people in. You can't simply extinguish it. What happens to them then?" Holmes's gaze softened, and he placed a hand on Watson's shoulder. "I understand your fear, Watson. But the lantern's light is not peace. It is an illusion, and we are the only ones who can break it. We must stop it from taking any more lives, from claiming any more souls, and to do that, we must sever its hold over those it has drawn in." Holmes moved toward the lantern, his steps measured and calm. The figures around it, including Lady Victoria, continued to move in their trance-like state, oblivious to everything around them. The lantern's light grew brighter still, its pulse quickening as though it were aware of what was about to happen. "Watson," Holmes said without looking back, "we must do this together. You must trust me." Watson stood still for a moment, his mind racing with conflicting emotions. He had seen the lantern's power, felt its pull. But Holmes was right. The peace it offered was not true peace. It was a hollow promise that came at the cost of everything a person held dear. Taking a deep breath, Watson stepped forward, his resolve hardening. "I trust you, Holmes." Together the two men moved toward the lantern, the light now blinding in its intensity. As they neared it, Holmes raised his hand, and for a brief moment, the air around them seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a swift motion, Holmes reached out and extinguished the lantern's flame. The world seemed to pause. For a moment, there was complete silence. The light that had once filled the garden was now gone, leaving only the darkness in its wake. The figures around the lantern, including Lady Victoria, stood motionless, their eyes blank. The haunting whispers faded into nothingness. And then, as if waking from a long sleep, Lady Victoria blinked. Her eyes slowly focused on Holmes and Watson, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she looked alive, truly alive, as though something that had been lost had returned. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her face flooded with emotion. I remember," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I remember who I am." Lord Bramley, who had been standing at a distance, stepped forward cautiously. His eyes filled with hope and disbelief as he gazed at his daughter. "Victoria?" Lady Victoria looked at him, and for a moment there was no recognition in her eyes. But then, a flicker of warmth passed across her face, and she took a hesitant step toward him. "Father, is it really you?" Tears welled in Lord Bramley's eyes as he stepped forward and embraced his daughter, his arms trembling with relief. "Yes, my dear, it's me. You're back. You're truly back." The garden, once filled with shadows and eerie stillness, seemed to exhale in relief. The fog that had surrounded them began to lift, the air clearing as if the very earth had been freed from an oppressive weight. The lantern, now extinguished, lay cold and lifeless at their feet. Holmes stood still, watching the reunion before him with a quiet satisfaction, but his expression was still thoughtful. There was no celebration, no sense of triumph. The lantern's power had been broken, but the mystery had not fully unravelled. They had stopped its influence for now, but Holmes knew that the darkness it carried still lingered. "We've done it," Watson said, his voice filled with wonder. "The lantern is no longer a threat." Holmes nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "For now, Watson. But there is still much we do not understand. The lantern is gone, but the power behind it remains, and we may not have seen the last of it." As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Holmes, Watson, and Lord Bramley stood in the quiet garden, their thoughts heavy with the weight of what they had just experienced. The lantern's light was gone, but its shadows would remain with them for a long time to come. The mystery had been solved, but it was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would unfold in the shadows of the world they had just uncovered. The journey, Holmes knew, was far from over. Was Chapter 10. The Echoes of Peace. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow across the garden, but the serenity of the morning felt strangely foreign. The events of the night before hung heavy in the air, a haunting reminder of the lantern's power and the lives it had touched. Holmes, Watson, and Lord Bramley stood together in the garden, the air thick with the scent of lavender, which still lingered despite the lantern's light being extinguished. Lady Victoria, standing quietly beside her father, looked bewildered, as though waking from a long and troubled dream. She had returned to herself, but the transformation she had undergone, the strange peace she had found through the lantern's power, had left its mark. Her eyes were filled with uncertainty, as if she were grappling with the very nature of her return. Lord Bramley, his arms still wrapped around his daughter, gazed at Holmes with a mixture of gratitude and lingering sorrow. "You've brought her back," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I don't understand. What exactly did we stop? What was that lantern?" Holmes's gaze remained steady, his thoughts distant. He had solved the riddle of the lantern's power, and yet the true nature of its influence was something far more complex than any mystery he had encountered. The lantern, though extinguished, still lingered in the corners of his mind, a symbol of something far older, far more dangerous than they could comprehend. "It was never just a lantern," Holmes began, his voice calm but filled with a quiet sadness. "It was a conduit, an ancient force, one that has been calling to those who are lost, offering them release in exchange for everything that makes them human. The peace it promises is a hollow one, a peace that leaves only emptiness behind." Watson, still grappling with the enormity of the mystery, asked the question that had been weighing on his mind. But why? Why would anyone seek that peace? Why would they follow it, knowing what it cost? Holmes paused, his eyes softening as he turned to look at Lady Victoria, who stood quietly beside her father, her face a mixture of confusion and understanding. "Because, Watson, we all seek peace, some more desperately than others. The lantern offered a way out, an escape from the pain, the grief, the burdens of the world. But it was never truly an escape. It was a trap, one that claimed those who followed it, erasing them bit by bit, until there was nothing left but the shell of the person they once were." He stepped closer to Lady Victoria, who now looked up at him with a faint glimmer of recognition. "Lady Victoria," he said gently, "you are not the same person you were before. The lantern took something from you, your memories, your very essence. But you are still here, and that is something we can work with. Her eyes flickered with emotion, but she remained silent, as though unsure of how to respond. The peace she had sought so desperately, the peace she had found in the lantern's glow, had been broken. But it was a brokenness that left her standing, still alive, still capable of healing. The garden, once shrouded in mist, now felt lighter, the fog slowly lifting as the first rays of sunlight touched the earth. The lantern, now cold and lifeless at their feet, no longer glowed with its ethereal light, but its presence still lingered in the quiet, as though it were waiting, watching. "Holmes," Watson said quietly, his voice filled with a new sense of understanding. "You said the lantern was a conduit, a gateway, a promise of peace. But what was behind it? What was the force driving it?" Holmes looked toward the horizon, his eyes distant as he reflected on the puzzle that had consumed them. "The force behind the lantern, Watson, is a mystery that remains unresolved. It is part of something much older, something that has existed for far longer than we could imagine. But I believe that the lantern was not its true purpose. It was a tool, a means to an end, and the end, I fear, is something even more dangerous than we can fully understand." Lord Bramley stepped forward, his voice steady now but tinged with the remnants of his grief. "You've given us back our daughter, Mr. Holmes. But at what cost? What have we lost in the process?" Holmes turned to face him, his gaze filled with empathy. "You've lost nothing, Lord Bramley. Lady Victoria has been returned to you, but she has been changed. What she was and what she is now are not the same. But there is still hope. She can rebuild. She can heal. The lantern may have taken something from her, but it could not take everything." As they stood there in the quiet garden, the weight of the night's events began to sink in. The lantern, though extinguished, had changed everything. It had altered the course of their lives, brought them face to face with a mystery far deeper than they could have imagined. And yet, as dawn broke fully over the manor, there was a strange sense of calm that began to settle over the group. The lantern was gone, but the echoes of its power remained. Lady Victoria, still standing beside her father, looked at Holmes with a quiet sadness in her eyes. I feel different," she said softly, almost as though speaking to herself. "But I also feel free. I don't understand it, but I know that something has changed within me, something that I can never go back to." Holmes nodded slowly, his expression calm but filled with an understanding that went beyond words. "You are not the same, Lady Victoria. But that does not mean you are lost. There is always a path forward, even after the darkest of journeys. The lantern may have taken everything, but it did not take your will to live, your desire to find your way back to the light. That is something you must now rediscover." The silence that followed was peaceful, yet heavy with unspoken emotions. The lantern had taken its toll, but in its wake there was a chance for healing. The figures who had once stood around it, hollow and lost, were now gone. The garden was no longer a place of shadows and eerie whispers, but a place of quiet hope. Holmes, Watson, and Lord Bramley exchanged glances, their minds still filled with the enormity of the mystery they had unravelled. The lantern, once a symbol of darkness and despair, had been extinguished, but the shadows it had cast were not so easily erased. "I don't know what lies ahead," Holmes said softly, his voice carrying a quiet finality. "But I know that this chapter is over. The lantern is gone, and its hold on this place has been broken." "But there is more to it, isn't there?" Watson asked, sensing the underlying truth in Holmes's words. More that we don't fully understand. Holmes met his gaze, a faint smile tugging at his lips. There is always more, Watson. But for now, we have done what we could. The lantern's power has been undone, and those it claimed have been freed. As the sun rose higher in the sky, bathing the garden in its golden light, the three men stood in quiet contemplation. Lady Victoria, though changed, was not lost. Lord Bramley, though shaken, had his daughter back. And Holmes, ever the observer, had solved a mystery that had seemed beyond comprehension. But he knew that mysteries like this never truly ended. There would always be another shadow to uncover, another mystery to solve. But for now, the lantern was no longer a threat. And as the morning light broke over the manor, casting away the last remnants of fog, they knew that the echoes of peace would continue to resonate, even as the lantern's light was extinguished forever. The end.